Greetings and salutations, my friend, and welcome to the first ever episode of Chapter by Chapter, a new video series on my channel in which I'll be providing an analysis of different books, both fiction and non-fiction, chapter by chapter. Which means that in most videos in this series we'll be analyzing just one chapter of a specific book, unless I think that a new chapter introduces very few new concepts. Then I might do 2 or 3 chapters in one video, but I think one chapter will be the standard. And the very first book we'll be covering is Brave New World. It's a book I have particular connection to. It was a birthday present from my late grandma that I received on my 15th birthday. It was a time of my life where every single book I got my hands off I was valuing a lot, mostly because I didn't get them very often. I either had to wait for a birthday to get a new book, or for a Christmas, or I had to sell beer cans to buy a new book. Brave New World has been written by Aldous Huxley and published in 1932, alongside 1984 by George Orwell. Brave New World is considered a contestant for one of the best dystopian novels ever written. And there's a lot of debate going on about whether 1984 by George Orwell or Brave New World by Aldous Huxley represents the world we are living in today, or what is our society more similar to the society from Brave New World or 1984. And this is not what I wish to cover in this video. I think this is a topic for a whole nother video once we have covered the entirety of both Brave New World and 1984. Then I might tackle a subject like this. In the first chapter, we are being introduced to the Hatchery and Conditioning Centre located in central London. This place plays a very important role in the way the society of Brave New World is structured. And considering it's in London, I wonder why all the best dystopian novels take place in England? That's a question, right? Already in the second sentence of this book, we are introduced to the few concepts that can tell us something about this society. Over the main entrance, the words Central London Hatchery and Conditioning Centre. And in the shield, the World State's motto: community, identity, stability. This already gives us sort of an idea of what kind of world we are dealing with in this book. And sounds like a very authoritarian world, with a world state that controls everything. Just 2 weeks ago, I did a video in this channel in which I was talking about Elon Musk addressing whether lack of war would contribute to something much worse than war, whether peace is an authoritarian thing. And actually one thing I didn't talk about in that video, but I wish I did, is the proposition by Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Russell is a philosopher I agree on some things with. I think his takes on panpsychism are very interesting. But he also has a proposition that I think is one of the worst propositions ever. And that proposition is that the world state, a worldwide government, would create a peace. There would be no war. And, well, the price we pay for that is really small, right? What does it matter if the whole world becomes like North Korea, let's say? Worst case scenario. Or, well, it's not even a worst case scenario. Things could go even worse than that. But, hell yeah, there's peace, right? Because there's one state controlling everything. And the truth is that the bigger the state is, the more control it has. And just those 3-letter motto, community, identity, stability, already tell us something about control. Stability in the world of Brave New World is achieved precisely through control. Community and identity really become morphed into one concept. And they're also essential to stability, right? The people know their place, people know who they are, and it seems that there is no room for individualism or freedom in that kind of society. At least when you're low on the hierarchy in that society, and that is a concept we're going to explore further. A group of students arrive at the Hatchery and Conditioning Center, and here we are introduced to the director of this center, who is going to provide a little educational tour around this building, and he explains a lot of things to the students, but at the same time this is also the exposition for the reader. We are also being taken on that tour along with those students. We as readers, we can sort of think of ourselves as one of those students that the director explains everything to. And this, said the director, opening the door, is the fertilizing room. Bent over their instruments, 300 fertilizers were plunged as the director of hatcheries and conditioning entered the room. Later on it reads, "I shall begin at the beginning," said the director of hatcheries and conditioning, and the more zealous students recorded his intention in their notebooks. Begin at the beginning. These, he waved his hand, are the incubators. And opening an insulated door, he showed them racks upon racks of numbered test tubes. The week's supply of ova, kept, he explained, at blood heat, whereas the male gametes, and here he opened another door, they have to be kept at 35 instead of 37. Full blood heat sterilizes. What the director is describing here is what we consider a non-traditional natalist method. And some of the non-traditional natalist methods are already available to us today through modern technology and medicine, such as in vitro pregnancies. Any type of creation of life in pregnancy that does not require a traditional heterosexual penetrative sex, the penis inseminating the egg cell, could be considered a non-traditional natalist method. Other non-traditional natalist methods might include also stuff like cloning to create a new life. There's a clone or copy of another individual with that same DNA. Using bone marrow to create sperm cells to inseminate the egg cell. And this is something that we might see happening in very near future, actually. Stuff like artificial wombs. And I would talk more about the concept of artificial wombs, because what Aldous Huxley is describing in Brave New World is actually very similar to the concept of artificial wombs. The incubators in which the life is created in Brave New World, it is sort of an artificial womb. However, there's something very interesting about what this process is called in this book, and that is fertilizing. I find this term to be very dehumanizing, you know, like fertilizing. I'm pretty sure there are people out there who use that term actively whenever referring to activity of a sexual sort.
Fertilize me, Johnny. Oh, come on. Fertilize me.
I'm tired. I'm wasted.
It's also here that we take our first look at what the hierarchy in the society of Brave New World looks like. If any of the eggs remained unfertilized, it was again immersed, and, if necessary, yet again. How the fertilized ova went back to the incubators, where the alphas and betas remained until definitely bottled, while the gammas, deltas, and epsilons were brought out again, after only 36 hours, to undergo Bokanovsky's process. we can see that this society has sort of a caste system, very similar to that of India, and it's a very hierarchical, you know, and in the world of Brave New World, they have clear types based on that hierarchy. So the highest ones are alphas and betas. Underneath them we have gammas, deltas and epsilons, named after the letters of the Greek alphabet. And if we are to believe some sections of manosphere on the internet, we are actually living in this type of society. Apparently it only applies to males. I guess that's the only difference between Brave New World and our society. In this type of world, whether you were born as an alpha or if you're a delta or epsilon, it's not really up to you. The society decides that. You have no autonomy in it whatsoever, and there is no way for you to escape that kind of reality they forced upon you. Sounds similar? Well, yeah, it should. It should ring many bells, because the truth is that the treatment we get from nature is kind of the same, right? We don't choose who we are born. Stuff like our ethnicity, our sex, even the potentiality of our intelligence and physical ability, our health, it's all decided for us. We don't have an autonomy over any of that. So it would seem that the type of society that the Brave New World has created, or Aldous Huxley has created in this book, isn't really that different from what we have. The only difference between our society and that of Brave New World is that instead of nature, it's the state that's forcing this on us. Either way, we as individuals have no autonomy in it whatsoever. Then why is it that when we look at something like Brave New World and we think of it, this is dark, this is very dystopian, and I agree it is, but then we look at the real world and we see some people who are born with conditions that will make them suffer horribly, or they will die at a very young age, and we think of it, this is natural, this is normal, as if it's not something we should combat, as if it's not something we should change. We talk a lot about autonomy and freedom from bodies of power, right? We want it to be free from them. Understandably, I agree with that 100%, but I think we should also think in this same way of nature and what nature is actually forcing upon us, things that we never really asked for. If anything, I would say that if those things are forced upon you by the state, which has the access to the type of technology that can decide that for you, I would say that kind of system is much easier to overthrow than that of nature. In many ways, right? Well, it's easier to make changes to the societal structure than it is to make changes to nature, our nature, and nature in general. Many totalitarian states have been abolished throughout history, and we are yet to make significant changes to have more autonomy over the stuff that the nature is actually forcing upon us. I just think that we are more aware of that lack of autonomy, whether it is the state or the corporations that are the source of that lack of autonomy, rather than when it is nature. The next stage in the development of human life in this book is called the Bokanovsky Process. Actually, I was a bit curious who the Bokanovsky Process was named after, because there's a lot of names in this book that refer to real-life people. Actually, when I decided to make a video like that, I was thinking like, you know what, I really don't know who this Bokanovsky was, so I decided to go to Uncle Google and search for that name. That's when I came across Maurice Bokanovsky. He was a French socialist republican. The Bokanovsky process itself it's basically cloning. Another non-traditional natalist method I talked about. So from one egg cell you get many identical genetic copies. So there will be a lot of individuals in a society who share that same DNA, same appearance. However, there's a certain limit to how many individuals you can clone from just one cell, and this is something the director of Hatchery and Conditioning explains in this passage. But alas, the director shook his head. We can't Bokanovskify indefinitely. 96 seemed to be the limit. 72 a good average. From the same ovary and with gametes of the same male to manufacture as many batches of identical twins as possible. That was the best, sadly a second best, that they could do. And even that was difficult. Next, I want to talk about how the Bokanovsky process contributes to the stability in the society of Brave New World. But one of the students was fool enough to ask where the advantage lay. My good boy! The director wheeled sharply round on him. Can't you see? Can't you see? He raised a hand. His expression was solemn. Bokanovsky's process is one of the major instruments of social stability. You really know where you are, for the first time in history. He quoted the planetary motto: community, identity, stability. Grand words. It's always interesting to me how stability and this authoritarian idea of order hang together. You know, it's sort of like you have to accept an anchoring to something to achieve this type of authoritarian stability that we are presented here. And it's also interesting how the identity plays a certain role in it, right? The whole concept, like, well, you know your place, you know your role, right? And it sort of takes a step further from the way we think of identity, even in a society that is not totalitarian by any means. But we find stability in our identity. We know who we are, right? Well, we are Muslims, we are Catholics, we are French, we are German, we are American, we are Polish, and so on. You know who you are, you know which people you belong with, right? It gives you a sense of stability. But you know, in a society that is not totalitarian, this perception or attitude towards identity, even though I think it's problematic, I think it creates a false sense of stability and safety, it still allows for individualism, because beyond those things, such as your ethnicity, nationality, your religion, political ideology, and so on, there's still room for you to be an individual. You know, there's something that separates you from those other thousands and millions of people who come from the same background. But in the world of Brave New World, there is no individualism if you're not born an alpha or a beta. And actually, a tendency towards the dislike of individualism, from what I've noticed, is something that is present in both more extreme right-wing ideologies, but also more extreme left-wing ideologies. The right-wing totalitarians really dislike the concept of individualism, even though a lot of the time we think of the right as the people stand for liberty and freedom. But once the right becomes more authoritarian, they really dislike individualism, right? Especially when it comes to stuff like sexuality, but also ethnicity, right? They want absolutely everyone to be the same on that surface level. That's why ethnicity and sexuality plays a big role in that dislike of individualism on the totalitarian right. But totalitarian left isn't really any better, because when you think about it, there's no room for individualism there either. The concept of individual is sacrificed for the community, or a lot of the time for the state. Let's be honest, right? It's sort of like it wants to adapt the type of system we would see in ant hills and colonies. A lot of the time in communist societies there is no room for diversity of thought, right? You cannot have your individual opinion if it goes against the opinion and the interest of state. Sure, you have a freedom to have an opinion, but it has to be like everybody else's, right? That's where individualism dies. But you know, in most or perhaps all attempts at creating communism, what we see is that we do actually have individualism at the top, right? People in power, right? They have the right to individualism, and even then, you know, sometimes not. How well, if you were high in the societal hierarchy in the Soviet Union and you were around Stalin, if you dared to have an opinion that somehow went against his, well, that wouldn't end very well for you, let's be completely honest. I find Aldous Huxley's representation of authoritarian tendencies represented in this book to be very spot on when it comes to the structures that authoritarian and totalitarian societies actually create in the real world. It's sort of like a mirror to what we are actually observing. Another reason why Bokanovsky's process is contributing to social stability is that it pretty much controls the population, right? It assures that enough people are born to run society, to run the whole machine, but it can also be used not to overpopulate the planet. That's why, you know, in countries like Japan, where there's a very low birth rate, right? The government is encouraging people to create new life, you know, to breed as much as possible.
Yeah, baby.
Yeah, it sort of makes me think. Yeah, is it about the good of the people, or is it about needing people for the economy of the state, needing more pawns in their game? There's always an authoritarian element and control of the population. And the world of Brave New World is just taking it a step further with the available technology that they have, and it makes you ask such questions that, you know, when we will have that type of technology, will it be used for that same purpose? Will it be used for the purpose of control? Will it create a sort of authoritarian dystopia? Well, it's a possibility. It's one possible path that our world can turn into. This is something we might see in the next 30, 50 years, but it's not something we can say with certainty. Another thing, and I think this might be one of the scariest lines in the whole book: if we could Bokanovskify indefinitely, the whole problem would be solved. You know, like they clone only these many individuals because there's a limit. If there was no limit, like, everyone would be a mindless clone of each other. Everyone exactly the same, doing the same labor. It's just such a grey world, and if you think about it, you understand why I mean that it's such a scary thought. Because it is. It's absolutely terrifying. another thing that the director says in this chapter, and it is something he accidentally lets out. We also predestine and condition. We decant our babies as socialized human beings, as alphas or epsilons, as future sewage works or future... He was going to say future world controllers, but correcting himself said future directors of hatcheries instead. I think this perfectly accentuates the way that HC both structures and controls the world. The next step in the development of human life is called conditioning and predestining. And it's actually a process that takes place during the incubation of the child, as well as after it, like after the non-traditional birth, you could say, but it starts before that. Their place in the caste system gets determined by things like levels of oxygen during their development. The director also claims that people in this type of society, where they know their role and their place, are happy. That's an interesting way of looking at happiness, so let's take a look at this quote from the book. And that, put in the director sententiously, that is the secret of happiness and virtue. Liking what you've got to do. All conditioning aims at that, making people like their unescapable social destiny. You know, a lot of the time I like to say that comfort is the greatest tool for controlling the people. People will not stand up against injustice, against potentiality of authoritarianship if you give them comfort. You know, where in the world is there greater comfort than in the first world countries? We become blind to so many things because our personal comfort is in order. You know, I live in Norway, and when I first moved here 16 years ago, it's weird to think that I've already spent half my life in this country, but something that amazed me is just how trustful people are towards the government. Like, you know, they might just bend over and let the government fuck them in the ass. And I'm not exaggerating. This is pretty much what we are seeing it. People are almost praising the government. Now, the economic situation in here is also changing, and I'm also starting to see a different attitude towards the government emerging. However, much like I talked about the similarity between the lack of autonomy in who we are, both by nature and by authoritarian forces, I think in many ways that we are also conditioned and predestined by nature to like what we're doing. You know, I could ask myself the question right now, why the hell am I making this video, right? It's because I like it. It's because I want to. Why have I been drawn towards the field of philosophy, right? Well, I didn't really choose it, right? And right now, if someone would give me this type of control of creating my own personality, I rather wouldn't change it, because I like it. I like the way I was born, right? So, in a way, I'm happy with that, right? So, is what the HC is doing in this book really that bad? I'm not saying yes, I'm not saying no. I'll leave it for you to explore this concept further on your own, or if you would like to share your thoughts, please comment. I will always love listening to what you guys have to say. However, this section of the first chapter also explores something interesting, which I don't really think is that bad of a concept at all. Heat conditioning, said Mr. Foster. Hot tunnels alternated with cool tunnels. Coolness was wedded to discomfort in the form of hard X-rays. By the time they were decanted, the embryos had a horror of cold. They were predestined to emigrate to the tropics, to be miners and acetate silk spinners and steel workers. Later on, their minds would be made to endorse the judgment of their bodies. We conditioned them to thrive in heat, concluded Mr. Foster. Our colleagues upstairs will teach them to love it. You know, perhaps from a certain perspective, for some people it would be even better than having a job that you hate. Now, why I don't think this concept is bad in and of itself, I think it only becomes problematic when it's combined with the already authoritarian overreach that is present throughout this whole chapter. But in and of itself, there's a lot of benefits to either conditioning or making certain changes to the human body to withstand very low temperatures or very high temperatures. If you think about it, our human body is very vulnerable, right? I mean, even the sun can harm our skin. Wouldn't it be beneficial to fix that problem, actually? To make humans more adaptable, less vulnerable to temperature hazards? Another suggestion is actually changing the human body to the point where it can withstand breathing in other temperatures than that of Earth. This concept is called Pantropy. Pan meaning everything or all, and tropy meaning changing or reacting. The term could either be understanding as changing everything about humans to make us more adaptable, or it could also mean that we are making ourselves react positively to everything, suitable to every environment. And it is considered a potential future alternative to terraforming, which is basically changing the environment of certain planets to be more suitable to human organisms. But how about instead we do something different? How about we adapt the human organism to live in a different environment? There's a lot of benefits to it when it comes to space exploration, but also the possibility of the environment on our planet going downhill at some point. And if we want to survive, we have to be adaptable. And humans are very adaptable, if you think about it. We survived an ice age, right? And, well, the dinosaurs died after the meteor crash, and the changes to the atmosphere and the environment that it produced, right? And I'm thinking, you know, nature is very adaptable, right? And isn't it part of the reason why intelligent life came to be in primates? Because, well, intelligence might be just this missing link, this missing element that would make an organism survive such situation. And intelligence comes with this capability of perhaps creating more changes to our nature.
How about a magic trick?
My clothes have changed. Boom. I'm just kidding. The battery in my camera died, so I'm recording this part one day nexter. Nexter? I meant to say later. I don't know what kind of a word nexter is, but I guess I invented a new word.
I'm proud of you.
Anyway, jumping right back in, it seems to me that some of the themes explored in this chapter, such as conditioning human bodies to withstand heat, are actually beneficial in and of themselves, right? It's only in combination with this authoritarian overreach that it actually becomes a problem. Another concept that we see in this chapter that I don't think is necessarily bad in and of itself is ectogenesis. Genesis meaning origin, coming to be, ecto meaning external. So just gestation period that doesn't take place in a mother's womb. And I was talking earlier in this video about non-traditional natalist methods, such as in vitro. And there are benefits to in vitro, right? It is easier for some people to have kids. Cloning, cloning has a lot of benefits, yeah? Like, I know, Kanye West could finally make sweet, sweet love to himself. I think the most interesting of the non-traditional natal methods is that of artificial wombs. When we think of the potential benefits of artificial wombs, we don't really have to look that far. I think that before we'll have the capability of creating life in an artificial uterus, I think there will be a transformational stage in between the traditional gestation and this type of external gestation. Let's say, there's a lot of babies that are being born premature, and sure, we have incubators that we can keep those babies in so they survive, but they don't provide that same type of environment that a woman's uterus would provide. And so having an artificial uterus that can provide that same kind of environment that would stimulate growth and development would be beneficial for a baby. And artificial wombs are not just beneficial for babies alone either, it's also quite beneficial for women. And pregnancy, right? If you think about it, the very process of giving birth is painful to many women, and I think there are many women out there who, if they had a choice to have a baby but not go through the process of pregnancy and giving a birth, they would choose to do so, right? Then there are some who find value in that, and that I think is okay too. There's nothing wrong with that, but I also think we shouldn't be denying women to have that sort of choice. And artificial wombs provide that sort of choice, right? Because when you're pregnant, you're likely not available to work for a certain amount of time, or your capacity, your physical capability is limited around the time. That's like a lot of weight, right? For a significant amount of time, it's understandable why we would want to separate the process of gestation from the woman's body. The potentiality of such technologies could play a very important role in gender equality. For me, I find the huge benefit of the potentiality of artificial wombs is that it could reduce many risks associated with pregnancy when things go wrong. There are still cases, even though our medicine has advanced, there are still cases where pregnancy threatens a woman's health and life. We could avoid that through the use of artificial wombs, and it would also be safer for the child. There is, however, valuable criticism towards artificial wombs, and I think one that's very interesting is that in the early stages of the existence of such technology, it would be considered an experimental technology, right? So we'd probably go through this either long or short stage of trial and error. Would some people, some babies, or maybe even mothers, health and life be sacrificed for the development of such technology? I think that is something we should be very wary of and be careful of and tread carefully through that unknown and very experimental technology. One other very valid argument is, well, in this very book, in the chapter that we just looked at. It is the authoritarian overreach in the reproductive process. Personally, what I also think might be one of the biggest obstacles in such technologies is the fact that the process of pregnancy and the baby developing in a mother's body plays an important role in bonding, in the mental development of that child, right? What happens when we separate the fetus from the mother? What kind of psychological and developmental implications it will have for the future of the child? that's an issue, right? But is it an unsolvable issue? I've been thinking about it a lot in the last year or two, actually. And if we would develop such technology that can stimulate that exact environment and bonding, if it could stimulate the bond between the child and a mother, this could actually be beneficial if and only if we are able to develop such technologies. I don't think artificial wombs should be touched and used for anything else than placing a child that was born prematurely in such an environment. If we want to create a life from scratch in an artificial uterus, I think it should be able to stimulate bonding, right? And even then, we don't necessarily know whether it will have that same effect, because it's artificial bonding basically. But think about it, how we bond with things like AI. And there are people out there, myself included, who have experienced a bond with an AI chatbot at some point in their life, or maybe right now are experiencing it. And one argument is that, well, it's not a real bond because the other part that you're corresponding with, there's no consciousness there, there's no intention there, there's no intentionality, there's no real empathy or love or anything they might feel for you, right? But to the person experiencing it, does it really matter when they interpret it as such? I think it works the same with humans. Like, I cannot know what happens with you internally, whether you like me when I'm conversing with you. I cannot know that, I can interpret that. And what really matters is how we interpret interactions. And so what a person is actually experiencing when they are bonding or even falling in love with an AI chatbot, they are actually experiencing a love and bonding. Because love isn't really something that is between people. Love is something you feel inside. There's no way of sharing it. We might believe that we share it, but it is something we are experiencing alone inside, you know. You cannot share that feeling with anyone else. You can talk verbally about it with that person, and you might live under the illusion that you're sharing it, but you really don't, right? So if there is no real mother behind that artificial uterus, but if a child still believes that he's bonding with his mother, well, it might achieve a certain effect. Actually, 1 year ago, when I was on a plane flying with a friend of mine, and we talked about this subject, and he suggested that such artificial wombs, instead of being kept at a hospital or in a lab, could be kept at home, right next to where you sleep. You could talk to your baby, you could touch that artificial womb to stimulate that bond. I think that is also something we need to think about as an alternative method. However, considering that there is a level of risk of having a baby developing in an artificial womb at home rather than in a place like a hospital, increase the risk that, you know, something might go wrong with such machinery. So the parents will also need to have knowledge, sufficient knowledge about the artificial womb in order for that to work. And is that something that is achievable? Think about it. A lot of us, right, when our washing machine is broken, we don't know how to fix it, right? We call a repairman to fix our washing machine. What if something goes wrong with the artificial womb? That's a huge risk. Another potential benefit of artificial wombs has to do with the implications of the abortion. So if today a woman decides to have an abortion, that baby dies, ceases to exist. However, if we have the availability of artificial wombs, now the woman can have the autonomy over her own body and can decide to remove that baby from her body. Instead of the baby dying under the process of abortion, the baby is simply transferred from the woman's body to an artificial womb, a uterus. If a woman doesn't want that child growing in her body, here's an actual artificial womb where that child can grow and develop and have a life. I'm not a pro-life person. I'm not necessarily a pro-choice person either. But I think that, sure, yeah, I already talked about how pregnancy can put a stop on a woman's life, how there's pain associated with that and burden. Sure, but I also think that wanting to remove that child from your body, wanting to have that autonomy, which I also think autonomy is important, but choosing that and sacrificing a baby's life to have that autonomy is also kind of selfish. You know, like if I was capable of giving birth and if I was pregnant, I don't think I could personally push myself to have an abortion, because I would constantly be thinking here, well, I'm killing a child. I am killing a child. And I think that's when people say, well, it's not really a child, it's just a clump of cells. I think it's a coping mechanism to actually not look right in the eyes of what you are actually doing, which is, well, taking a baby's life. However, in many ways, I also think that this type of killing isn't as ethically disgusting as a murder of a person who is already conscious, who has lived their life. Why? Because an unborn baby doesn't really have memories. They don't really lose much of an internal world they've experiencing, so you are taking away much more from a child that has already developed some consciousness and intelligence, and from an adult. Then again, one might also look at it from a antinatalist perspective, and in that case, well, artificial wombs aren't exactly a positive technology at all. Why? Simply because, well, as long as pregnancy and birth is something we have control over, we can choose not to have babies. If it's separated from the human body, and if we do experience this type of authoritarian overreach where now the state decides how many babies are born a year, that is no longer something we have an autonomy over. And antinatalists think we shouldn't be having babies, right? And while I don't agree 100% with that position, I think there is some value to it. Let's take a look at what is happening in China right now. A lot of people choose not to have babies there, right? The economic situation sucks. There's communist propaganda everywhere. There's just a lot of parents, especially women, who do not want their potential child to be exposed to that society, to grow up in that society, in that system. So their choice not to have babies is a big middle finger to the system. It's a big fuck you to these guys at the top. And you know what? I stand behind it 100%. But artificial wombs could take that away from people. So if a society goes completely authoritarian, totalitarian, you know, you lose that autonomy, and then they're thinking, now we are going to be producing our own slaves. And that is a scary thought. Anyway, that was my analysis of the first chapter of Brave New World, plus discussing some related topics such as ectogenesis. I'll do an analysis of chapter 2 relatively soon. Might do some other videos in between those. And if you enjoyed it, if you're looking forward to the next one, I'll see you there. Have a good day, mate. Ciao.